You know, there are moments in life when something invisible sweeps across the soul, something you cannot explain, something you cannot name, but you feel it, like a shadow passing behind you, like a whisper brushing the back of your mind, like a presence standing in the doorway before you even see it. We all experience it. A sudden discouragement out of nowhere, a heaviness that doesn't match the day, a fear you can't justify, a doubt that erupts in the middle of a moment of grace, a temptation that feels strangely personalized, as if someone studied your weaknesses long before you noticed them yourself. Every one of us has lived this, and deep down, we know it's not random. That is why the writings of Saint Faustina shake so many souls, not because they bring something new, but because they confirm something we always suspected. She simply unveiled what was already happening in the shadows. She articulated what many believers feel but cannot explain. She exposed the strategy behind the invisible attacks that surround the chosen ones, those who, even imperfectly, even weakly, are trying to walk toward God. And once you see the strategy, you can never unsee it. Before we go deeper, let me tell you something clearly. If you are watching this, you are not here by accident, not today, not at this exact moment, not with this exact topic. There is something inside you that recognizes the truth even before the mind understands it. That inner click, that quiet certainty, that subtle burning in the chest, is the sign of a soul that has already been touched by God, and therefore a soul the enemy has already marked as a threat. This topic is not for the curious. It's not for those looking for entertainment or religious folklore. This is for the ones who have felt the battle at night. This is for the ones who have sensed the traps inside their own thoughts. This is for the ones who have endured invisible pressure while trying to do what is right. This is for the ones who have wondered, why is it that every time I decide to grow spiritually, everything suddenly becomes more difficult? If you've ever asked yourself that question, Saint Faustina's revelations were written for you. But before we dive into the enemy's strategy, before we uncover how he studies, attacks, manipulates, and attempts to derail God's chosen ones, I need to ask you for one thing. Subscribe to the channel right now, not later, not at the end, right now. Because the things we'll discuss in this series are spiritual weapons. And in times of spiritual battle, you don't walk unarmed. If you want content that strengthens your discernment, that sharpens your soul, that unveils the traps hidden behind thoughts, emotions, and daily experiences, then subscribe so you never face this battle unprepared again. Now, take a deep breath, because what you are about to hear next is not merely information, it is revelation. A mirror, a light pointed directly at the cracks where the enemy tries to enter. Let us begin. Most people imagine spiritual battles as something dramatic, visions, voices, extraordinary attacks. But the true battle is quieter, colder, more calculated. It begins where thoughts are born, where emotions rise, where fears whisper, where wounds hide, where desires form, where silence becomes dangerous. Saint Faustina understood something essential. The enemy rarely attacks the body first. He attacks the interpretation of reality, because if he can distort your perception, he can distort your decisions. And if he can distort your decisions, he can distort your path. And once he distorts your path, your soul begins to walk willingly into the traps he prepared. This is the strategy, not force, but distortion. Not fear, but confusion, not destruction, but slow corrosion, the kind that makes a soul stop trusting God one fragment at a time. And so the question becomes, how does he do it? How does he identify who to attack? How does he choose the timing? How does he personalize the temptation? How does he disguise himself? How does he infiltrate thoughts? How does he sabotage a soul quietly enough that the person believes it is just part of life? Saint Faustina gave us answers, clear ones, precise ones, terrifying in their accuracy. But before we unlock each strategy he uses against God's chosen ones, there is something we must clarify. This is perhaps the most unsettling truth she revealed. The enemy does not attack everyone with the same intensity. He does not invest equal energy in every soul. He focuses on the chosen ones, those God intends to raise, to purify, to use, to draw closer, to strengthen, to illuminate, to sanctify in ways the world will never understand. He studies them, tracks them, waits for them, and when the moment is right, he strikes not at their weaknesses alone, but at their deepest callings. This is why some people live peaceful spiritual lives, not because they are better, but because they are not yet dangerous. The chosen ones, however, experience sudden waves of discouragement without explanation, temptations that feel tailored, emotional storms that come out of nowhere, paralyzing doubts about their worth or calling, strange resistance whenever they try to pray, misunderstandings that erupt at the worst possible moment, internal voices whispering accusations, cycles of guilt that seem impossible to break, exhaustion exactly when grace is trying to lift them. If you recognize these symptoms, do not be afraid. It does not mean you are failing, it means you are a threat. But a spiritual battle is never won with emotion, it is won with understanding. So now we move into the core. What exactly is the strategy? What are the enemy's methods, the patterns he repeats, the pressure points he manipulates, the shadows he uses to bend the will of God's chosen ones? Saint Faustina revealed many, but we will explore them here slowly so that each one becomes clear, identifiable, and impossible for the enemy to use against you again. Every soul has one wound that shapes the entire spiritual battle. A fear, a memory, a hidden insecurity, a silent pain, a longing unanswered, a rejection that still echoes, a disappointment you pretend doesn't matter. The enemy begins here, always, not with sin, not with temptation, not with distraction, with the wound. Because the wound is where trust is fragile, where defenses are weak, where darkness has permission to whisper. Saint Faustina understood that hell's first objective is not to make you fall, but to make you doubt. Doubt yourself, doubt your calling, doubt your forgiveness, doubt your strength, doubt God's love for you. The wound is the door. Doubt is the key. And once doubt opens the door, the enemy steps in quietly, smiling as if he were a friend offering advice. He rarely says, "God does not love you." Instead, he whispers, "If God loved you, why would this still hurt?" He rarely says, "You are lost." Instead, he whispers, "If you were really close to God, why would you still struggle with this?" He rarely says, "You are worthless." Instead, he murmurs, "No one would ever choose someone like you." And the soul, already wounded, already tired, already limping, believes the whisper because the whisper matches the pain. This is where the strategy begins, but it does not end there. Because once the wound is reopened, the enemy moves to the second stage, distortion. This is one of the most brilliant and devastating strategies Saint Faustina unveiled. The enemy does not always try to destroy your spiritual life directly. Instead, he distorts the very things meant to strengthen you. Your prayer becomes dry. Your Bible reading becomes confusing. Your friendships become sources of conflict. Your talents become burdens. Your responsibilities become traps. Your routines become suffocating. Your spiritual practices become distractions. Your moments of grace become moments of guilt. Your calling becomes a source of fear. Every gift becomes a battlefield, not because the gift changed, but because the enemy changed your perception of it. He attacks prayer by making it feel ineffective. He attacks scripture by making it feel distant. He attacks community by twisting intentions. He attacks grace by injecting guilt. He attacks calling by injecting fear. He attacks devotion by injecting exhaustion. And all of this leads to the next step in the strategy: pressure. Chosen souls often describe a strange heaviness, a pressure that seems to intensify precisely when they decide to grow spiritually. This pressure is not emotional. It is not psychological. It is spiritual. Saint Faustina described moments when the enemy surrounded the soul like a suffocating fog, not to terrify the person, but to discourage them in the exact moment God is trying to elevate them. Have you ever experienced this? You finally decide to pray more, forgive someone, return to confession, break a cycle, heal an old wound, change a habit, or surrender something to God, and suddenly everything becomes harder? That is not coincidence. That is counterattack. Because the enemy knows something you sometimes forget. Whenever God is about to raise a chosen soul, the pressure intensifies first. This is the moment when many people step back, not because they are weak, but because they misinterpret the pressure. They assume, I must be going in the wrong direction, when in reality, the pressure is proof they are going in the right direction. This is why we must understand the strategies deeply and clearly, because once the enemy realizes you can recognize his tactics, he loses his power. In the next block, we will uncover the exact fourfold structure of the enemy's attacks. Methods Saint Faustina made unmistakably clear. These are not metaphors, not poetic expressions, not symbolic ideas. They are specific psychological and spiritual mechanisms used over and over again against those God is preparing for greater things. When you understand these four shadows, you break the enemy's ability to manipulate you forever. There are patterns in the spiritual world, movements, sequences, structures, like the silent choreography of an enemy who has studied human nature for thousands of years. Saint Faustina revealed that the attacks against God's chosen ones are not random, improvised, or chaotic. They follow a four-shadow sequence, a progression of spiritual pressure designed to weaken, confuse, isolate, and finally derail a soul that heaven is trying to elevate. These shadows come quietly. They arrive disguised. They settle slowly, but once you recognize them, you see them everywhere. Let us reveal each one, not as theory, but as experience, because every chosen soul, in one way or another, has walked through these shadows. The first shadow does not feel like evil. It does not feel like an attack. It feels like life, ordinary life. But distraction is the enemy's favorite opening move because it requires no sin, no rebellion, no rupture, only a gentle shift of attention away from the things that nourish your soul. And here is the secret. He does not distract you with things you hate. He distracts you with things that look legitimate. Work, routine, fatigue, chores, opinions, responsibilities, notifications, tasks waiting, people needing something, a dozen small urgencies that appear the moment you try to prioritize the eternal. And so the soul begins to say, I'll pray later. I'll reflect tomorrow. I'll return to that intention when the weekend comes. I'll read scripture when I'm less tired. I'll restore my spiritual life when things calm down. But things never calm down, because the enemy ensures they don't. He does not close the door to God. He simply keeps you too busy to walk through it. The most tragic part, most chosen souls do not realize it is happening because they assume distraction is natural, accidental, unavoidable. Yet Saint Faustina saw this. The chosen ones are attacked first in their attention, long before they are attacked in their virtues. A soul that stops paying attention stops discerning, and a soul that stops discerning stops growing. This shadow is gentle, subtle, appears harmless, but it is the foundation of everything that comes next. Because once the soul is distracted, the enemy introduces the second shadow, one that bites deeper. If the first shadow distracts you from God, the second shadow turns you against yourself. It begins with a whisper, "You're not doing enough." And then it evolves, "You're not good enough. You're not holy enough. You're not strong enough. You're not worthy enough. You're not disciplined enough. You're not lovable enough. You're not sincere enough. You're not chosen after all. This attack is not fear, it is identity sabotage. A chosen soul can withstand external storms, criticism, challenges, obstacles, but collapses under internal accusation because it touches the deepest part of the self. The enemy knows this. He knows a chosen soul rarely falls through outward temptation. They fall through inward erosion. And so he twists your own thoughts against you. He uses guilt not to purify, but to paralyze. He uses self-examination not to help you grow, but to make you despair. He uses humility as a mask for self-hatred. Saint Faustina described it perfectly. The enemy disguises condemnation as conscience, so the soul believes the attack comes from within. This is evil's brilliance. The enemy speaks in your own voice. And a chosen soul, believing the accusations, begins to sink. What if God is tired of me? What if he's disappointed? What if I'm beyond healing? What if I'm pretending to be someone I'm not? What if this calling is too big for me? Once doubt becomes personalized, the enemy deepens the shadow into something heavier, discouragement. But discouragement alone is not the goal. It is only the preparation for the third shadow, which is far more dangerous and far more effective. There comes a moment when the soul, exhausted by inner accusation and confused by spiritual dryness, withdraws. Not intentionally, not dramatically, quietly. The person starts praying less, not because they reject God, but because they feel unworthy. They talk less about their struggles, not because they don't care, but because they fear judgment or misunderstanding. They participate less in spiritual community, not because they don't want connection, but because they feel like a burden. Isolation is not loneliness, it is spiritual abandonment of the self. And this is the strategy. The enemy isolates the chosen precisely when God is trying to draw them closer. Isolation is subtle. It does not shout. It whispers, "No one understands you. You're too much. You're not like them. You don't belong anywhere. You must carry this alone. If you open up, they'll reject you. If you ask for help, they'll judge you. You are safer in silence." But silence becomes a trap. The soul begins to suffocate with its own thoughts. Isolation is the enemy's favorite environment because he knows something essential. A soul that battles alone will eventually battle in the dark, and a soul in the dark loses clarity. Without clarity, the enemy introduces the fourth shadow, the most dangerous of all. This is where the enemy strikes hardest. He knows he cannot steal God's grace. He cannot erase God's presence. He cannot undo God's calling. So he attacks what you think God is doing. He distorts your interpretation of events. A moment of spiritual dryness becomes, "God abandoned me." A moment of trial becomes, "God is punishing me." A delay becomes, "God is ignoring me." A pruning becomes, "God is rejecting me." A spiritual challenge becomes, "I am spiritually failing." A cross becomes, "God must be disappointed with me." A temptation becomes, "I am unworthy of grace." A period of silence becomes, "God no longer speaks to me." This is not merely emotional misinterpretation, it is a spiritual hallucination, a falsified narrative about the soul's relationship with God. In this shadow, the enemy doesn't need to tempt you directly. He only needs you to draw the wrong conclusions, because if he can distort how you interpret God's actions, he can distort your entire spiritual journey. This is why chosen souls often experience cycles of despair right before significant breakthroughs. Not because they are far from God, but because God is closer than ever. And when heaven draws near, hell panics. This panic takes the form of confusion, discouragement, and misinterpretation because the enemy knows the chosen ones are about to rise. He knows elevation is coming, and so he compresses the soul with noise. You're lost, you're stuck, you're deceiving yourself, you're not chosen, you're on the wrong path, you're too broken to continue. You're going backward, not forward. None of it is true. But in the fog of isolation and discouragement, it can feel true. This is the purpose of the fourth shadow, to make the soul distrust the very God who is fighting for it. Yet this shadow too collapses the moment the soul recognizes it. Because the truth is this: the greatest spiritual attacks occur not when you are falling, but when you are rising. And Saint Faustina understood it deeply. The chosen ones suffer more not because they are weaker, but because they carry greater light, and the enemy fears light. Here is something Saint Faustina made astonishingly clear. No matter how strong the attack, heaven's protection is stronger. The enemy can distract, but God can refocus. The enemy can accuse, but God can restore. The enemy can isolate, but God can draw near. The enemy can distort your interpretation, but God can illuminate your understanding in a single instant of clarity. Spiritual battles may feel overwhelming, but they are never fought alone. God never withdraws his hand. He never abandons his chosen ones. He never leaves a soul unprotected. He never allows darkness to crush someone. He is preparing for greater intimacy. The pressure you feel is not a sign of defeat. It is the evidence of your calling. The intensity of the attack reveals the intensity of the mission. Saint Faustina saw it clearly. The souls most attacked are the souls heaven most desires. And the more the enemy rages, the more God surrounds the soul with invisible grace, strength, illumination, and divine tenderness. Because the chosen ones do not walk into battle alone. They walk with heaven at their side. If you reach this point, your soul knows why. Something inside you resonated. Something inside you recognized these shadows. Something inside you felt seen, maybe for the first time in years. You are not imagining the battle. You are not exaggerating the pressure. You are not inventing the opposition. You are not mistaken about your calling. You are not weak. You are not abandoned. You are not lost. You are chosen. And the chosen are tested because the chosen are destined. Destined for depth, destined for intimacy with God, destined for transformation. Destined for a mission no one else can fulfill. Destined for battles only your soul can fight. Destined for victories only heaven knows you are capable of. The enemy attacks what he fears. He fears you, not because of who you are, but because of who you are becoming. And now that you understand his strategy, his shadows lose their power. If this message touched your soul, if it clarified battles you've been fighting in silence, if it revealed truths you always felt but could never articulate, subscribe to the channel now. Not as a formality, not as routine, but as a spiritual decision. Because here you will find insight, strength, clarity, and the spiritual tools you need to continue walking as one of God's chosen ones, fully awake, fully aware, and fully armed. Your journey is sacred, and it continues from here.